What's up? This is Everybody Settle Down. I am Charlie Marlow. That is the great Eric Messersmith. Eric, how you doing? And it seems like Joe, for now, he's staying in the old race. I don't know if he should. Actually, I don't think he should, but I think as of the second we're talking right now, which is 12:35 Central Time, Joe Biden is still in the race.
Yeah, so far, today's a big day. Later on today, we're recording this on Thursday, as you mentioned. There's the press conference, his first press conference since not only since the debate, but in months. So if that goes badly, we're at the point now where I think he's teetering. So coming into the debate, I think the odds were way under 50% that he'd be pushed out. After the debate, I think they shot up above 50%. Not just my own personal feelings, but the betting markets too. And then I thought he would eventually go until Monday. Monday, when he went on Morning Joe and was so defiant, and then his campaign sent a letter to Congress. I thought, man, I don't know. I don't know if they're going to be able to force him out. But in the last few days, I've shifted back to my position that I've had most of the time after the debate, which is ultimately I think he will go. I think the pressure will be too much. And you're starting to see the cracks this week with people like Nancy Pelosi coming out and not saying he should go, but not saying he should stay either. Saying essentially, like, she went on Morning Joe yesterday, which, if people don't know, Morning Joe is Joe Scarborough's show on MSNBC. It is Biden's notoriously, or like infamously, his favorite show. He called in Monday. Like, I would say Joe and Mika, his wife slash co-host, kind of have a let's say a sycophantic relationship with Biden. I mean, they are like as far as in can be in defending Biden. So that's like the show to go to. And Nancy Pelosi knew Biden would either be watching or would get wind of it. And she essentially went on and said, well, we need to give him the time to make his decision. And whatever he decides, when he decides, I support. Well, if you noticed, that changed the narrative. Biden had been hanging on and doing pretty well, but the betting market's starting to move after Pelosi did that. Why? Because Pelosi, she essentially said, let's give it a little bit of time and he will let him decision. Like, over and over again, he has said publicly, privately, I'm not leaving. I'm staying in, right? So when Pelosi comes out and publicly says, well, let's see what he decides, when he's already decided, that is the clearest sign you can get that she is basically saying, hey, Joe, you need to really rethink this. And it's kind of like if you were talking about where you wanted to go for dinner with your wife and you were like, well, I want to go to Taco Bell. And then like 10 minutes later, your wife is like, Charlie, where do you want to go for dinner? You should really decide. And you're like, I want to go to Taco Bell. And then like she comes back 10 minutes later and she's like, Charlie, I just want to give you the time and space to make the right decision about what you think we should do. And you're like, no, I want Taco Bell. And then she's like, Charlie, I really think whatever decision you make, I'm going to go with and I'm going to be fine with. And you're like, Taco Bell. And then like 10 minutes later, Charlie, I really think you should consider all the information and come back with a decision. And then I will support your decision 100%. Like, that's where we are now. It is abundantly clear that the vast majority of Democrats, elected Democrats, know that this is to run this 81-year-old man after that debate performance is almost certainly a losing proposition. The cracks are forming, but on the other hand, they're trying to make it a dignified exit without doing what a few have done, which is just come out to say he needs to go.
Yeah, so I also saw Tim Kaine. We forget about good old Tim Kaine, of course, Hillary Clinton's running mate. And maybe we should talk about Hillary in a second here too. That would be quite interesting. But no, I did see a clip. I think it was on X. And Tim Kaine, I think he had his glasses up on his head. It kind of looked weird, but he basically said, look, I trust Joe Biden, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said, I trust Joe Biden to do the patriotic thing or to do the right thing, and he's never let me down. And so again, that was I trust Joe Biden to step down. It was pretty obvious what he meant there. He was being nice about it. And it's funny. So we'll get this out as soon as possible, but later today you have this press conference which actually the White House press folks themselves called it a big boy press conference, which to me is just it's so pathetic and it's emasculating and it's demeaning. And so I was over at a buddy's house earlier today, and they had Fox 2, the local station I used to work at, and the news was on. And on the ticker, so I wrote this down in my phone because as I saw this, I go, I got to write this down because we're doing the podcast. Everybody settle down with Eric later, and I got to bring this up. It's just kind of the same line of, big boy press conference. On the ticker of Fox 2 News was Biden to hold solo news conference to prove fitness. And I'm like, this is the president of the United States. He's been in politics for 50 years. And now every day he has to keep proving himself with a press conference or an interview, which, by the way, he can't. He can't anymore. I'm sorry, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube after the debate. But like when you say big boy press conference, oh, hey, he's going to hold a press conference, a real one, a big boy one. He'll prove you all wrong. It just feels so beneath the office of the president, Eric.
Yeah, it's been clear these last 2 weeks that they are trying their best. The White House and the Biden campaign and Biden himself, they're trying their best to make a unwinnable situation winnable. And that's what they've been doing. And so far, it's succeeded because he hasn't been forced to resign or forced to not announce he's not seeking the nomination. They got lucky because Congress wasn't in session last week for July 4th. Things really started to turn late Monday into Tuesday when the members of the House and Senate got back into D.C., started meeting with each other, talking to each other for the first time since the debate. And then the media is constantly asking them what they want to do. And as I said, often the people who aren't calling for him specifically to not be the nominee are doing more damage even than the people who are because of what they're not saying. They're not saying, I think Joe Biden is our best chance right now, because everyone pretty much knows he most likely isn't. He most likely is not the best chance. And if you were going, I thought there was no way to save it after the debate. But if there was, it would have been doing this press conference, I don't know, the next day or the Monday after the debate, and then doing a bunch of interviews, not one 22-minute interview with George Stephanopoulos, but doing a bunch of interviews. That would have been their, in my opinion, their best chance. I won't say their only chance, because there is just at the end of the day, Biden just saying no, no matter how much the pressure builds, right? But we're in this weird phase where you've had, I think it's up to 9 House Democrats now, and you've had Peter Welch, who's from senator from Vermont. He's the only Democratic senator that have come out specifically and said, I do not think Joe Biden should run. You had George Clooney wrote an op-ed in the New York Times, and he matters. I mean, he's one of their big fundraisers and obviously one of the most famous people in America. And I thought his op-ed was really well written. Again, from the vantage point of someone who's known Biden forever, he says he loves him. I mean, a huge supporter. And the Clooney thing, the thing that really hurt there was Clooney said, the man I saw at that fundraiser in LA a few weeks ago is the same guy at the debate. So that is him not only saying, I don't think Biden gives us the best chance to win, but also saying, yeah, I've seen a decline. I mean, he said he's not the same guy even of 2020 when he ran for president and defeated Trump the last time. So I think when you put all that together, despite their efforts, I think the pressure's building. And look, if you look at the betting odds, a few days ago, Biden had gotten it back up to around 20% to win, and Harris was at around 10. Today, Harris is up to 18. Biden is down to 11. Harris is up 4% in the last day. Biden down 3. That's according to presidentialbettingodds.com. So that shows you where the people are putting their money, kind of reading the tea leaves, that yes, he's saying he's sticking with it, but he's teetering. And it's only going to take, I mean, hell, if this press conference later today doesn't go well, that would be enough, I think. If it's anything like the debate, I think that would be enough. But if he gets through the press conference and through the end of the NATO summit today, you get into the weekend. He's got some campaign events. He's doing an interview with Lester Holt of NBC, I think, on Monday, which is actually smart counter programming, the first day of the Republican convention. But I think over this weekend, you're going to see the pressure build. I think there's some members of Congress who were waiting until the NATO summit ended in D.C. later today, and I think you'll see more come out later today or over the weekend calling for him not to run. The pressure is going to continue to build because I think at the end of the day, they just know this is an untenable situation. This is going to be the story all the way up to the convention. And then if Biden somehow hangs on and is nominated after the convention, if anything comes up, because and then of course it's too late. You can't switch it out. Of course, you could of course tell people, well, vote for Biden and you're really voting for Harris. That, you could do that. It's not impossible, but it becomes a lot harder, and it doesn't give you the chance to have what I think is the best case scenario, which is an open audition for the next month for the nomination. Let the candidates or potential candidates try to convince the delegates and the American people they're the best choice. I think as time goes by, that is less and less likely. I think we're getting into the point now where if Biden does do what I think he ultimately will do, which is step aside, it's almost certainly going to be Harris. As the time goes by, it becomes more and more likely that the party would just rally around Harris rather than doing what I think they should do, which is have an open contest.
Yeah, I agree with that in terms of I want the open contest. I feel like you have a pretty good pulse of all of this. And before we press record, you said you think, or there's a good chance that Joe Biden steps aside next week. So I'll let you clarify that, but also roll out. When you said this, I thought it was just a fantastic idea. I mean, think about next week, the Republican National Convention, and the perfect time, the perfect scenario, if there is one, for Joe Biden to announce this. You could just next week steal all the headlines and ruin the whole Republican convention.
Yes.
I guess it kind of ruins. I mean, it ruins Joe Biden's life also, but it also ruins the Republican convention if they're strategic next week, Eric.
Yeah, look, from the earliest days of this podcast, going back when we started, January, February, I've always said I don't think Biden will step aside, because back then I thought the odds were less than 50-50, but I thought there was some chance. And I said, if you're going to do it, early to mid July is the time, because that gives you enough time to have a contest to pick someone else, but it also can really steal the headlines from the Republicans. I mean, and why not? If you're going to do it, and again, I want to be clear. I think as of this moment, Joe Biden and his people think they're staying in. Like, I don't think Biden is behind closed doors right now thinking, oh, when do I time my announcement? But I'm saying if he gets to that point, which I think there's a decent chance he will, if he's convinced that's the best way, then I think the timing question is obvious. You do it Wednesday or Thursday. Let the Republicans attack the Biden-Harris administration Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, then maybe leak it out Thursday as Trump's getting set to give his speech, announce it Friday, steal the momentum. Now you've energized the Democratic base, because there was a poll that came out today from ABC News. Over 50% of Democrats said Biden should drop out. It was like 54% of Democrats, 67% of people overall.
Oh, it's
Now, to
higher
be
than that.
fair,
It's
in the
higher.
same, yeah, it was, I think, what was
I'm
it,
just saying
70% overall?
no. I'm just saying I think some of those people are lying.
Oh, right.
I think all Democrats want him out. Being honest.
Yeah. I think, look, there is a contingent that is very loyal to him, and for whatever reason, and has their head in their sand. But I agree with you. It is a strong minority. But here's the thing. In that same poll, ABC News, a poll where a large majority of voters overall and even a majority of Democrats say Biden should not run. A poll where I think it's 80% say that Biden is too old to be president. Now, to be fair, over 50% say Trump is too old too, which I agree with. I think they're both too old, because I don't think people over 80 should be president. 67% of respondents, ABC News Ipsos poll, said Biden should drop out of the race. 50% say Trump should drop out. So, we got to remember, Trump's not very popular either. So that's something to remember as well. But in that same poll, when they said, who would you vote for? It's Trump 46, Biden 46. They're tied. In Harris beats Trump 49-47 in that same poll. That's one of the few polls I have seen ever that has Harris doing better against Trump than Biden. And I think that's where we are. That shows you it is right there for you, Democrats. Like, how terrible was that debate? How bad have the last few weeks gone? All of the negative stories about Biden. And at the end of the day, he's running in this poll even with Donald Trump. Now, this is an outlier. Overall, average of polls, Trump's ahead by about 3. But that's less than I thought. Like Trump was up by about 1 going into the debate. The day after the debate, I thought, oh, in a couple of weeks, Biden's going to be down 4, 5, 6 points. He's down 3 in the average. And in this ABC News poll, they're even. Now, in a way, that helps Biden's argument, right? Saying, look, I'm right there. I can win. But what it also shows you is the tremendous weakness of Donald Trump. Like, even after that, Trump can't get a big lead. He has a lead. He's winning right now. He's the betting favorite to win, but he's not putting this race away. And the reason is because he himself is so incredibly unpopular. And also, people know the word has gotten out about things like Project 2025 and what potentially a Trump administration could be like. It's right there for Democrats. They can win this thing if they make the right decision. And that's what elected Democrats know. And that's why I think what's going to happen is if Biden is stubbornly trying to stay in, I think you will get to the point where they will have to make the tough decision of, do we go to him and ask him to resign? And by we, I'm talking about the high-ranking elected Democrats. Hakeem Jeffries, who's the Democratic leader in the House, Nancy Pelosi, who I mentioned, the Speaker Emeritus, Jim Clyburn, who famously helped Biden get the nomination in 2020 from South Carolina, Chuck Schumer, the Senate leader. That's where we are in this process. They have done as much as they can do gently. Like Pelosi going on Morning Joe and being like, well, he needs to make the decision, even though he's said over and over again what the decision is. They've kind of exhausted the steps before you get to the really tough, let's try to push him out conversations. We're at that point. And over the next few days, those leaders are going to have to make that decision if Biden does well at this press conference or does well enough, and if he refuses to leave. If those things happen, which are certainly not guarantees, but let's say they happen. Let's say Biden does fine at the press conference, and let's say a few more lawmakers come out after the NATO conference tonight or tomorrow and ask him to leave, right? Say he should leave, but he hangs in. Then I think you get to the point where those leaders, in particular Jeffrey Schumer, Pelosi, they will have to make the hard decision of, do we go to this president and ask him privately to reconsider? And that's a tough spot. I get it. But it's the smart thing to do, because as I mentioned, I think any other reasonable Democrat gives you a better chance to win than Biden does. I think that's abundantly clear to anybody paying attention. And also, not only like just from a strategy standpoint, it's the smart thing to do, but it's the right thing to do for your country, because this man, even if he somehow won, should not be the president for 4 more years. And you have to, at the end of the day, like, what are we doing here? Like, what are any of us doing in this democracy? And that's kind of the point that I thought George Clooney made in his op-ed, and other Democrats have made, that the few that have come out publicly, is they've basically been like, my loyalty, as much as I may like Joe Biden or agree with him politically, is not to Joe Biden. It is to the people, and specifically for these senators and congressmen, it's for the people who elected me, the American people. Like, I have an obligation to them to do what I think is in the best interests of our party and our country.
And I've said this all along. I do not want it to be Kamala Harris, but it does seem like it's going to be Kamala Harris. And if Joe Biden steps aside, obviously. And I do think Kamala Harris beats Donald Trump. Now, people on the right that are hearing this are going to say, "Oh, you're crazy." If you watch right-wing news, they basically just show Kamala Harris cackling. It's just like it's her laughing like over and over on a loop. But I'm just thinking, from an electoral standpoint, we all know Donald Trump, high floor, low ceiling. He's about a 47%. We're talking popular vote. That's kind of his ceiling. If you go back to the last election, okay, Joe Biden was about 51%. Whatever that number is now, because look, the Democrats have been bad with Biden, just the way they've handled Biden. The Democrats and Biden have been bad on the border, but still, whatever number you're looking at, like, tell me, Eric, show me the Democrat voter that was going to vote for Joe Biden but then wouldn't vote for Kamala Harris. I don't think that person exists.
No.
Maybe just like a 0.00001%. But I think what we're not focused on enough is there are so many independents, there are so many Democrats and Republicans in the middle that really don't like Trump, that really don't like Joe Biden, and say, look, I can't vote for Trump because he overturned the election. I can't vote for Joe Biden. He's too old. But at least, okay, Kamala Harris, I don't love everything about her. Maybe I'm not even a Democrat, but she's relatively normal. She's of the right age. You know what I'm saying? And so
Mhm.
I don't think you lose any Democrat voters by switching to Harris. And I think you do pick up the 1, 2, 3% of folks in the middle that want somebody different. And we can argue the competency of Kamala Harris. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just talking about of competent age and experience to do the job. I'm not saying she'll be perfect, but you would at least trust that person as a what is she? 55? I don't even know what she is. 58. Whatever she is, she looks like the age that a president should be. Joe Biden does not. And she comes across like that. Even if you don't like her, she's presidential in the way she does interviews, and she's the right age, and Joe Biden is just way over the hill.
She is 59. She'll turn
59.
60 just a few weeks before the election. She'll be 60. I think, look, it all comes down to percentages at the end of the day. What does one honestly think is Joe Biden's chances if he stays in? I'd say, look, he has some chance. As this ABC News poll points out, Donald Trump is a terrible candidate and he's despised by a large number of the American people. And as a result, anybody with a pulse has a chance. So Biden's got 20, 25%, I think is fair. And a generic Democrat who is a credible Democrat to get the nomination, any of the names we talk about, I think is starts at a minimum of 40%. But the difference is they have upside. Biden, his upside is very limited. That's what we're talking about here, is not who today on July 11th has a better chance of beating Trump, although that's important. It's who can make the case over the next 4 months. And that's the point about Biden is the debate wasn't just a one-off, it was a sign of things to come in that how is that guy going to be able to effectively make the case, even if he's better than he was at the debate? Let's say he's more like the Biden of the George Stephanopoulos interview or the Biden of some of the campaign events. Even that guy is not able to make the case effectively in a way that a younger, more energetic candidate could. I saw Pete Buttigieg. He, he's been a name thrown out there. And I'm not saying Pete Buttigieg would be my choice, but I'm just using this as an example. I saw him in an interview where he was asked about the economy, and his answer, he just knocked it out of the park. Like 2 minutes, just nailed it. And it wasn't anything amazing, but it was like, this is what a competent Democrat would say. And it's nothing like I heard Joe Biden say at that debate or even in the interview with Stephanopoulos. That is the difference, is the upside. When you are behind, and the Democrats are behind, not by a lot, but they're a little bit behind. When you're behind, you need variance. You need to switch things up. You need a different strategy, or in this case, a different candidate, because if you keep doing what you're doing and you're behind, you're probably going to lose. So things that introduce variance, that shake up the race, that give you a more dynamic, energetic candidate, that's what you need to have. And by the way, the underlying numbers are getting better and better. This gets lost in the headlines because of everything we're talking about. And inflation, the CPI inflation report came out today. It showed prices went down in June. They went down. The CPI number peaked in June of 2022 at 9.1%, which was a 40-year high. We all remember that. This June, 2 years later, it's down to 3%. 3% and heading down. All the inflation numbers way down to the point where now it seems the markets are betting in a huge probability the Fed starts cutting interest rates in September and maybe cuts multiple times between the end of the year, now and the end of the year. You have overall, despite the high inflation we've seen over the last couple of years, You have a story now you can tell if you're the White House, which is this inflation has come down dramatically. Interest rates are on the verge of being cut. And we did all of that without crashing the economy, with no recession. And in fact, with millions and millions of jobs created and unemployment still around 4%. You have it there. Like, the argument is there for you, but you need the person to make it. And again, this polling, I look at this and I'm just really surprised that Trump has not been able to expand the lead. And it just shows you how weak he is as a candidate and how beatable he is with the right person.
Yeah, I also think, and I know we're really focusing on this a lot, but it's almost like I don't think, okay, even if you're a Democrat, it's hard right now to point your arrows at Donald Trump when that is not the issue right now. And I'm not talking about us talking about it, but anybody out there, I feel like the Democrat Party owes it to themselves and the country to figure this out and make sure that Joe Biden steps aside, and then the whole party can be united about focusing and attacking Donald Trump. But it's embarrassing right now, right? I Now look, I've felt this way ever since we started this podcast. I think both candidates are embarrassing in different ways. Donald Trump to me is embarrassing because he tried to overturn the election. And the fact that so many Republicans looked past that and said he's still our guy. When you had people like Nikki Haley or DeSantis, okay, not the greatest candidates, but just normal law-abiding folks that believe in democracy. And even before Joe Biden's terrible debate, I said that Joe Biden was embarrassing for different reasons. Just he's too old. He's stumbling around. He was falling off his bike. He's fallen at the podium up there. He always looks awkward. He's saying all kinds of crazy stuff. Okay. But now, after you had the huge moment at the debate, it is now a national and international embarrassment, in my opinion, that the Democrats and Joe Biden are still trying to do this with Biden. Like, it's embarrassing. Every day, in my opinion, that Joe Biden doesn't step aside, it's more and more embarrassing. And I follow a bunch of pundits from all sides on X, and there's this debate amongst the Democrat, whatever you'd call it, the punditry, the surrogates, and half of them are saying Joe Biden has to step down. And it seems like the other half are saying, why are you guys focused so much on Joe Biden stepping down? Donald Trump is the real enemy, and Project 2025. And do you know what this will do? And women's rights and all that. But like, I think those people right now are embarrassing because they're not admitting the truth. And again,
Right.
the reason Democrats are passionate about this is because they want to beat Donald Trump. And I've had people in my own family like, why are you talking so much about Joe Biden stepping down when, hey, let's focus on Trump? It's like, no, the whole point of this is, if you actually, whether it's Democrats or anybody, if you want to beat Donald Trump, you have to replace Biden to do that. How do these people
Yes.
not understand that, Eric? It's not like, oh, you hate Joe Biden. Oh, you're nice to Trump. Oh, you're not a Democrat or whatever. It's like, no, the reason everybody's saying this is because to beat Trump, Joe Biden has to step aside. That's everything. That's everything.
Right. Right. And also, it is fair for the media and politicians and everyday people to question the president when he gave a performance like he did at that debate. Like, everyone would be, if we just kind of all ignored it and we're like, well, this is the matchup, we're good, and we didn't talk about it, that would be a dereliction of duty for, elected officials in the media in particular. So of course that has to be the big story. If you want to get to those weaknesses of Trump that are there clearly and right there to be picked up and be argued, then you have to first deal with this elephant in the room. And in terms of Biden's legacy, I mean, look, we've talked about this on previous episodes. The decision that he makes in the next, whatever, week, 2, 3, will really define his legacy. I mean, he will have a chance to either go out as the guy who beat Trump and had a pretty successful first term and then realized when his time was up and handed it off to someone who gave the Democrats a much better chance and maybe beats Trump again, or he will most likely go out as the guy who lost to Trump when he could have, and when pretty much everyone around was telling him he needs to step aside. He's too old, but he stubbornly held on. And then Trump comes in. And look, if you're a Democrat and you believe that Trump will do some pretty bad things, then that is your now become your legacy. And it takes away a lot of the things you have accomplished, literally takes them away because now Trump will come in and have a lot of power to wipe some of those things away, but it also figuratively takes them away because now all of these things you did accomplish will be lost to history by the fact that, you let Donald Trump have another term. John Lovett, who is one of the Pod Save America guys who worked
Mhm.
in the Obama campaign, Obama White House, he put out a great long X post the other day, and it's so good, it's worth reading. But I just want to read one part of it because I think he says this even more eloquently than I can. The stakes for the country are all that matter. The stakes for Joe Biden are beside the point, but it's worth saying just the same. Joe Biden can leave office as one of the greatest presidents in our lifetime who defeated Trump and put his country first at every turn, or he can leave a stubborn old man who allowed hubris and insecurity to destroy his legacy and perhaps our democracy with it. We all have our best and worst selves scrambling over each other, battling it out in the moments that define us. Where is the Joe Biden we elected? Where is the statesman? I hope that version of him shows up soon, and I hope the people around him know where to look. And that, look, at the end of the day, Joe Biden needs to make the right decision. I agree. His family, sure. We can talk about that. But I'm looking at these elected Democrats, and I get why they've done what they've done so far. I understand it. I don't necessarily agree with it. I think it's cowardly. I would do it differently, but I understand it. They want it to come without a huge fight. They know what the right thing is, and as they say, they're giving the time and space to make the right decision, right? But when you exhaust that option, and we're getting pretty close to that point, then you have a duty to act. So that's kind of the personal for Joe Biden. But as you mentioned, it's also a lot more than that. It's the political and it's the stakes. And there's two ways to look at it. What's played out over the last 2 weeks. One way is our candidate, our meaning the Democrats, had a disastrous debate performance. And we have spent the last 2 weeks in total disarray with people calling for him to step aside, with all of this chaos. What the hell are we doing? How can we win? Right? That's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is we have had maybe the worst 2 weeks that a presidential campaign has ever had in like modern history with like as bad as you could imagine it to be. And yet the average of polls on Real Clear Politics has Biden down 3. That ABC News poll that came out today has him tied and has Kamala Harris ahead by 2. So I would look at it glass half full and say it can't get any worse. Trump has actually played this smart. We haven't seen Trump much in the last few weeks. He hasn't been saying a lot of crazy things. He's been laying low and doing exactly what he should. Like, say what you will about Trump's and his campaign. They're smart people there. And they know what they're doing. And you can't, and Trump has played it well. And despite that, despite the Democrats imploding, despite Trump playing it well, you're right there. So if glass half full is all you need is a different horse who can do it, who can make the arguments effectively that are right there to be made, and you can pull this thing out.
Are you calling Kamala Harris a horse? Is that what you're doing there?
No,
No,
I do
look,
not want to be canceled.
right. Here's where I agree with you with the upside of somebody like Kamala Harris, even though she would not be my first choice. There is no upside whatsoever with Joe Biden. And here's where I think there is a lot of upside with Kamala Harris. Again, if you follow any type of right-wing news or all the memes and the internet, Kamala Harris, right? All they do is show her cackling. Basically, there's a lot of insinuation back in the day with who she was dating. There's a lot of that, again, if we're being honest, with the memes and the gifs. That's kind of the right how they feel about Kamala Harris. I'll be the first one to say, look, ever since the Trump era started, I've tried to watch much less news. And I do. I don't watch a ton of news. I watch it on my phone and all that. I watch the big events, but I will say this. It does seem like Kamala Harris. Now, look, Joe Biden's also been way less visible the last 4 years. We've seen that with the numbers of press conferences and all that. It also seems like Kamala Harris has been less visible. Now, that could also be me missing all these speeches she gives and whatnot. So, what I'm saying is, again, the right's always going to attack her. I do feel like if she has the number one chair, she has a big opportunity over the next month or so to kind of prove to people. You mentioned after the debate, probably the first time in a long time that I'd seen Kamala Harris really kind of talk a lot on a big stage, a big setting, was after Joe Biden had a terrible performance in the debate, and I was watching the post game there with Anderson Cooper, and Anderson Cooper was pretty targeted and hard on, like, look, Joe Biden was really bad, and Kamala Harris, I thought, handled a really tough situation well. She didn't act like it didn't happen, but also kind of, and Gavin Newsom did this as well. Hey, look, it was a bad night, but that doesn't erase 3.5 years. It doesn't erase what Trump's going to try to do. Again, if you're a Democrat, I thought she came out there and she handled herself well in a terrible situation. And again, I think the majority of folks who kind of only pay attention to politics in presidential elections, right, and they really ramp it up like this next 2, 3, 4 months, a lot of people are like, okay, we'll pay attention. It's the summer. Oh, now it's the conventions. Now we're going to start watching, right? Now we're really going to start paying attention to the news for the next 2, 3, 4 months. I do think there's a ton of upside. Even if you don't like Kamala Harris, there's a ton of upside because we haven't heard a lot from her. And if she just goes out there and does okay, in my opinion, it's such a dichotomy from Joe Biden, who, even if he is okay in some of these settings, you're kind of like always just, you're like, is he gonna fall down? Is he gonna say something? Is he gonna freeze up? Right?
One of the big arguments, well, let's start with the practical argument. The argument you always heard was, well, yes, Biden may have low favorability ratings. He may have a low approval rating, but he does better than anybody else, in particular Harris. And that was true. That was true. Here's the thing, it's not true anymore. Real Clear Politics average, as I mentioned, of the recent polls, these are all the post debate polls. Trump leads Biden by 3. He leads Kamala Harris by 2.6. And Harris is improving, whereas Biden numbers are getting worse. So that argument is out the window now after the debate. In terms of Kamala Harris as a politician, and again, I want to be clear. What would I like to see happen? I've said this over and over again. I think the best thing is for Harris and anyone else who wants it to fight it out over the next month, have a mini primary with debates, go to the delegates, run ads, do interviews. And if she wins it, she wins it. I think it would probably be better to get a fresh ticket. I've talked about Gretchen Whitmer and Josh Shapiro, the governors of Michigan and Pennsylvania, but it's probably going to be Harris if it's not Biden. She was not good in 2020 when she ran her presidential campaign. And then she struggled. Like, the reason people have a bad perception of her in large part is because of her struggles with her presidential campaign. And then after Biden tabbed her as VP, she had a disastrous interview with Lester Holt. You may remember that. That was the one where she said, he asked her if she's going to the border, because remember, they named her border czar, which really set her up in a position to fail. And she said, well, no, I haven't been to the border. I haven't been to Europe either. And then it was a disaster. She stopped doing interviews. I mean, she looked really bad. But as I've said, I've seen her recently, not just in this Anderson Cooper interview. I don't know if she's done media training or she's just gotten more comfortable. She is better, and she's a hell of a lot better right now than Joe Biden. Like, look, is she Barack Obama in his prime? No. But that he's not walking through that door. She gives you a better chance, and that's what matters. Also, let's remember her background. She was a district attorney, tough on crime. That was actually something that hurt her in the Democratic primary in 2020, when we were in a completely different moment with attitudes about, law enforcement. Now we're in a different moment, and she's running against a convicted felon. I mean, she could make that argument. That's what she could do that even Joe Biden couldn't do. So my point with Harris isn't that she's perfect. She probably wouldn't be my choice. I'd probably go in a different direction. But That upside is there and it's real, and you can no longer point to the data that says she doesn't give you a better chance than Biden.
Yeah, and I think you and I are kind of interesting when we do this podcast because you are such more in it, and like you remember these things because you're watching these interviews and whatnot. And I think for myself, who is a little more casual for the most part in how I consume politics, for example, once you said that about Harris with the border czar, I obviously knew she was the border czar, and she's been criticized a lot for that. I think the whole administration, all Democrats deserve a lot of criticism for how they've handled the border. I didn't remember that exact quote about I haven't been to Europe either. But like even her campaign, for example, I don't I don't remember any huge gaffes, right? Like I don't have the gaff in my head, oh, she did so terrible, like, the Marco Rubio small hands or the water bottle. I just remember obviously she didn't win, but nothing really stood out that, oh, she had a terrible performance. The one line, as you were talking, I'm trying to think. When I think of Kamala Harris, what do I think of? And again, I'm more the person that I'm really gonna see like the big ones. I remember she got a lot of flack for when she said, "Enjoy the long weekend." Remember? It was a Memorial Day several years ago, and instead of saying, "Enjoy your Memorial
Yes.
Day weekend," and
Yes.
obviously you're
Yep.
honoring
I do
fallen
remember that
soldiers,
now.
she said, I believe she tweeted something like, "Enjoy your long weekend." And I believe, whether she did that on purpose or not, I thought that was a really bad look. That was a stupid, unforced error. So in my head, I'm like, "Okay, that was bad." It's not something that eliminates you in my opinion. So I don't know. Even if she was bad, I mean, she obviously didn't win in 2020. I don't remember her being so bad that I was like, ugh, it was
No.
just kind of okay. She didn't win.
Right. And but she's good enough. That's the point, and she's improved. And I
To beat
think
Trump, good enough to
to beat
beat
Trump,
Trump.
right? Because you got to remember, you're talking about, and I mentioned as well some of these like quote unquote gaffes or some of these awkward. She's running against Donald Trump. I mean, are we serious here? Like, she's not running against like Jesus, right? I mean, what does Biden say? Don't. The one of the good lines Biden had was, "Don't compare me to the Almighty, compare me to the other guy." That is what we're into the binary. With apologies to the RFK Jr.
But
people, we are into the binary choice phase now.
hold on. To be fair, Biden thought he was standing next to Jesus though when he said that.
That's
Actually,
true. Yes, he did. He did. Well, he did tell Stephanopoulos that if God Almighty tells me to get out, I'll get out. So, maybe he's having a conversation that we don't know about. There might be someone else that could persuade him besides Pelosi and Schumer. Yeah, I think that here's the other thing too. When you look at these polls of that they've done throughout the year, and they're doing a lot more now, of Trump versus Biden, and then Trump versus all these other names that we've mentioned and some we haven't. Biden typically has done better in part just because of name recognition, just because the American people aren't as familiar with those other people. They're not as familiar. They don't follow this like you do or like I do. They're not as familiar. They might know a little bit about Gretchen Whitmer or Gavin Newsom, but they don't know much at all about them. And that would change obviously when you got into a campaign. And even with Harris, even though she's much more of a household name as the vice president, I feel like you make a great point in that people don't know much about her. They know bits and pieces, or maybe some of the things they've seen on X or a clip that surfaced here or an awkward laugh. She would have 4 months to reintroduce herself to the American people, to do tons of interviews, press conferences, speech at the Democratic convention, a debate with Donald Trump. Once that started, all of these things in the past that we've pointed to would be forgotten. And look, there's no guarantee it would go well. But if it did, none of the stuff that we've talked about is going to be a lasting impression if things went well over the next, 3, 4 months.
all right, let's talk Veep stakes. Let's assume that Biden steps aside and it is Kamala Harris, which I think we both agree will happen, even if we don't hope that's the case. And then did I see that Trump says he's going to announce on Monday his VP? And so I'm looking at the same election betting odds that you always look at. Right now, Doug Burgum is the favorite at 27%, JD Vance 26%, Marco Rubio 12, Ben Carson 8, so on and so forth. There's a bunch of other people in there: Ben Carson, Youngkin, Tim Scott, Vivek, a bunch of people down there. So both Veeps. Who do you think Trump will pick? And if we are assuming that Kamala Harris steps in for Biden, who do you think will be the VP for the Democrats?
Oh, wow. S- Look, I trust the betting odds. And I just have a feeling the betting odds are matching up with my instinct, which is it's going to be JD Vance. Vance has really surged in the last few weeks. Like Burgum had a big lead on Vance in the betting odds a couple weeks ago. Big, like more than 2-1. Now, as you mentioned, they're almost even with everyone else, back in the distance. With Trump, you truly never know. I mean, it's the ultimate wild card. But I just feel like Vance seems like an ideological fit in a way that Burgum isn't. Like Burgum has learned to speak the language of Trump. But if you remember when Burgum ran for president, if you watch those debates, he really didn't at those debates. He was just kind of like your normie Republican, business
I like him.
guy,
Yes.
Midwestern. He came off kind of affable. He was not speaking the language of the right-wing populism of Donald Trump. He has learned to pick it up as it's been clear he's auditioning for vice president. But that's not natural to him. With Vance, it is how he has made his political identity, which doesn't go back very far. I mean, he was just elected to his first elected office in the Senate 2 years ago. But since he ran his campaign, that is his identity. This populism of the new right, the MAGA populism. He speaks it as a second language. I think at the end of the day, that comfort level is what will do it. That would be my pick, but it's Trump, so who knows? The smart choice would obviously be someone who it's never going to be, which is Nikki Haley. I mean, you want to get those Haley voters, those suburban women. I mean, that would be Haley released her delegates to Trump, which is kind of like a symbolic move at the convention. She's, of course, come out and said she's going to vote for him. Like she would be the best choice he could make, but obviously that's not going to happen. In terms of the Democrats, if Harris does take the top of the ticket, I think you got to be strategic. Look, the best path to the Democrats winning the election, whether it's Biden or Harris or anybody else, the best, easiest way for them to get to 270 is to win Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Because even if they lose Arizona and Georgia and Nevada, which it looks increasingly likely that they will, if you give Trump all the states he won in 2020 plus Arizona, Georgia, Nevada, he'd have 268 electoral votes. He'd be too short. So Biden or another Democrat could lose all three of those states and still win if they hold Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. I think you have to be strategic, and I think it should be Whitmer or Shapiro, the sitting governors of Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Michigan, because Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, as I've said, they have voted together in the last 8 presidential elections. Those 3 states. That's not a coincidence. They vote together because they're similar geographically, they're similar demographically. And so get one of the governors of one of those 3 states, put them on the ticket and go. I probably would go with Whitmer because she's in her second term. She's won twice. She's a little bit more, polished in terms of having some national media. She's about to go on a book tour because she wrote a book. So I really, you want to really wrap up, try to seal the women vote. You have now 2 women on the ticket against a Trump ticket, which is probably going to be 2 men and most likely 2 white men. And now you have an African-American woman and another woman on your ticket as the Democrats. I just feel like it makes a lot of sense if you're trying to, again, maximize your chances to get to 270, because at the end of the day, that's all that matters, right? I mean, that's what we're talking about. That's the game. Get to 270 electoral votes. And for the Democrats, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, which have voted together, and in 7 of those 8 presidential elections, they've all voted for the Democrats, or they voted together for the Democrats. So those, and Biden is close. He's very close in all 3 of those states. So all 3 of them are very winnable. I think that maximizes your chances to win if you have a ticket of Harris and Whitmer or Harris and Shapiro.
Okay, don't get mad at me for saying this because I'm not saying I think it. but I think it's fair to bring it up. Now, I'm with you. I think a Whitmer Shapiro or Shapiro Whitmer is the best ticket. But if we're going to assume that Kamala Harris is the president, right now I think it's fair to say that Gretchen Whitmer does have a much bigger national profile. Is that too much woman? And I say that doesn't bother me personally, right? But having two women on the ticket, is that going to turn some people off? Look, let's be real about what America is. That will turn some people off. And I'm just wondering now, as you think it through, if you have two women and you make the whole deal about abortion, which you shouldn't, but you could, and it is the Democrats' best issue. You can see how strategically that makes sense. I like Whitmer on the ticket. I like her leading the ticket. I wonder, is America, because let's be real, America is slow with a lot of these things. We're slower than other countries in terms of electing our first black president. We have not elected a woman president, obviously, yet. So we're slower.
Yeah.
And we kind of, when I say we, as a country, we ease into these things a little more than other countries do. And I just wonder if you can just see some, oh, we're gonna have a couple of broads on the ticket.
Right.
Right? I mean, let's be
Yes.
real. Let's
Yes,
be
you
real about how
can.
that's gonna be
Could you
discussed.
imagine what the memes will be on X? I mean, if that would
Yes.
be, yeah, I mean, but here's the thing. I think you're right that that would bother people. I think those people that it would bother are already lost to you. I don't
Okay.
think they're voting for any Harris led ticket anyway. They're gone, in my opinion. So I think the people you would need to win wouldn't be bothered by that. But if you were concerned about that, Shapiro's right there. And here's an advantage for Shapiro that I think is legitimate to think about. The polling for there's been a lot of state polling of Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania in particular, and it's becoming pretty clear in the polling that Biden is doing better in Michigan than he is in Pennsylvania. Not by a lot, but there's a gap opening up there where the polling is pretty good actually for Biden in Michigan, and you would assume it would be the same for Harris. So if you're saying okay, because again, it comes back to winning the 270, right? And again, assuming you like them both and you think they both could be president and they meet that qualification, it's about strategy. And Shapiro is popular, and he won in 2022 with by like 15 points. Now, the guy he was running against was a bit of a clown election denier, sure, but still in
Radical,
a
yeah.
swing state when Fetterman in that same year beat Mehmet Oz by about 5 points, Shapiro in that same year won his race by about 15. So I just think that if you're saying which states, Pennsylvania is probably a little bit harder for you than Michigan. So from a strategy standpoint, maybe you do that more so than just not having two women.
Yeah, and as I'm saying this, because look, I always want what's best for the country, but as we're doing this podcast, and look, I do look at it through the lens of, I shouldn't, but entertainment too. And I'm just thinking about, is there anybody better to run? When I say better, I mean from the entertainment value standpoint that we're probably going to get. You got Trump. Trump's like the boys club, right? He's at the country club. It's the guys. I golf a little bit, not very much, but it's like the country club is the guys complaining about their wives, right? And then it's Trump running against two women, right? I mean, could you just imagine again the memes? People are going to say,
Oh
"Oh,
yeah.
we're going to have a bad year because or a bad month because it's the wrong time of the month." Like people, I mean, again, just imagine the
Right.
memes and the gifs and Donald Trump. Like Donald Trump is the lead, whether you like him or not. Donald Trump is the leader of the boys club, right? He just is. Like
Yeah.
everything about him, like, yeah, he's crass, locker room talk, right? He's having all these affairs. He's married 3 times. He's golfing. Him going against two women. I mean, like, again, you,
I
you
think
can't really bill it better from like an entertainment standpoint.
But also from a strategic standpoint, I think it presents some pitfalls for Trump because of his history, because of the Access Hollywood tape, because of some of the things he said about women. Now imagine he's on a debate stage with Kamala Harris. The things that you can say and get away with saying to another male candidate, maybe either you can't, or if you do, they come off in a way that turns off even further
Mhm.
suburban women, which is Trump's biggest issue or one of his biggest issues. And that is one of those things where maybe a Harris-led ticket, or if it comes to pass an all-female Harris-led tickets, gives you a chance to get more and more of those women and run up some of those margins with those people who are like, you know what? I didn't like Biden. I didn't love Biden. I thought he was too old. But now we don't have Biden. I have another alternative, and I've never really come around to Trump. So I feel like it would completely change everything. Obviously, the Trump campaign has spent all of their time prepping for Biden, I'm sure, a little bit for Harris, and you're starting to see what you're talking about. I noticed it right after the debate. I noticed just scrolling through X, I was starting to see more stuff about Kamala Harris than I really ever had, and
Willie
negative stuff
Brown,
too. The Willie
of
Brown stuff,
course,
right?
yeah.
That stuff's being dug up. The clips of some of her lines that maybe didn't land well. You're starting to see it because and that just shows you where we're potentially headed, right?
All right, let's close this bad boy up. I have to go to the bathroom, I'm not gonna lie. So we'll let you empty your notebook here at the end, Eric Messersmith.
Yeah, we haven't
What you
actually
got?
talked a whole lot about Trump, which is crazy, right? I mean, this guy who's
No.
dominated headlines for the last 8 years. We really haven't talked a whole lot about him, but for rightfully so. I mentioned earlier, Trump has played this well. Like you can tell whatever you may say about him, and I've said my share, and others have as well. He has good political instincts, and his people are professional now. That wasn't always the case with his campaign people. And you've noticed he's really been really quiet, strangely quiet for Trump over these last couple of weeks. And that's, I'm sure, strategy. And it's smart. When your opponents are self destructing, lay low. Don't make yourself the story. And the fact that he's shown that discipline, I think, is really interesting. Also, they've made a smart move with their convention platform. You have to give them credit, like the way that he has tried to manage this abortion issue, which is his weakest issue. He has done, I think they've done everything they can. Whether it works or not, we'll see. But they've done what they can do. And he literally said it during the debate. It got lost in the shuffle because of Biden's performance. But he literally said on an answer to abortion, you have to try to win. And he's
Mhm.
essentially admitting, look, I'm moderating my position because I want to win. And that's smart. And in the platform, the Republican platform had always called for a right to life. And now a constitutional right to life amendment. That's not in there this year. Now it's essentially, well, we're going to leave it to the states. Like that is smart. The Project 2025, this 900-page document that calls for a complete overhaul of the federal government, including some pretty crazy ideas made by many people, most of whom have some ties to Trump. Their supporters, they were literally in his administration. Like these are Trump people. They are people who most likely would be in a future Trump administration. That starting to get a lot of traction online and in the liberal media. What did Trump do last week? He put out a Truth Social post. He put out another one today that said, I don't know anything about it. I've never read it. I don't know about it. The parts I do know, I disagree with a lot of it. Like that was smart. That was starting to become a problem. And now he's trying. Now, we can argue about how realistic that is, considering, again, if you go down the list of the people that did it, they are literally people who were worked in his administration or are big supporters of him. So, you can argue about whether or not what he's saying is fair or accurate or what it means. But the point that he realizes it's a concern and is trying to get out ahead of it and deflect it before most Americans start to really become aware of it. Again, that's smart. We'll see how the convention goes next week. We'll see how there's been some talk. I guess Dana White is going to be there to speak before Trump. That'll be interesting. I guess Marjorie Taylor Greene is getting a speaking spot. I'm not sure about the wisdom of that. Mike Pompeo, who I think is a pretty effective surrogate for Trump in terms of foreign policy, will be there. We'll see how they organize that. But what I'm trying to say is Trump has learned and improved on politics. On policy, I don't know that he has. I mean, like his policy is still pretty thin. I mentioned the Republican platform. It's really thin on policies and specifics. It's basically like general stuff of we're going to make America awesome and, deport the immigrants and magically bring down inflation. Like there's not much there. But when you're the challenger and your opponent is 81-year-old who has trouble stringing sentences together, you don't need much, right? You don't need a lot. And Trump has benefited from that so far. And that is the smart play. And you have to give them credit for their evolution. And we'll see how they execute the convention next week.
All right. Can't wait. Everybody settle down. Charlie Marlow, Eric Messersmith. Thank you, Eric. We'll be back next week, especially if there's any big news next week. We'll jump on. It's going to be crazy with the Republican convention. And who knows, maybe Joe Biden steps down next week. Thank you for commenting, liking, subscribing, share the show, share the channel, put it in your group text, put it on social media, and we'll keep this thing rolling. See you, everybody.